defines a generation. Music is a soundtrack of revolution. Music is a soundtrack of movement. Music is a soundtrack of cause. There is an intersection of politics and pop culture that you didn't even know existed. There's some boy, some girl sitting in a cubicle along K Street, somewhere in DC. A boy, a girl sitting in a cubicle along a hill with a Capitol with a dome who has single-handedly decided what you wore today. Whoa.
Mike Muse is an industrial engineer, a music executive, a political architect. He breaks down the intersection of politics and pop culture. This is the Mike Muse Show.
Nobody can show you love. Usiwamini, ukishawapa wanakwenda. Basi jilegeze, nikubebe mgongoni.
What's happening, world? It's your boy Mike Muse, and welcome to another episode of the Mike Muse Show. I am so excited you guys have joined us again. Oh, I gotta say that pretty fast. Welcome back to the award-winning Mike Muse Show. I think you guys can get annoyed with me because I'm going to keep saying that over and over again. I can't believe in less than a year we've already received our first award, and that's because of you. And I'm so thankful for you listeners for rocking with us, for tweeting us, for DMing us, for Instagramming us, and for emailing us all your fascinating conversations and questions that you have for me. We're always excited to bring you the best and the most innovative conversations around policy and lifestyle. You guys know that's my sweet spot. And boy, let me tell you, I have a really exciting conversation that I'm excited to have with you. So here's what happened. So I was in New York City, that's where we broadcast at, and I had the distinct opportunity to go to a gala in the celebration at the Rainbow Room. And for those of you not familiar with the Rainbow Room, it's this really big, fancy place here in New York City. It's old world New York. Think the Rockefellers, think the Astors, think the Whitneys. Those have really been caretakers of New York culture and society and the philanthropic circles in New York City back in the 1920s, 30s, if you will. And so there's this really big gala for Kenya Airways. And so they were celebrating their launch of a direct flight from JFK to Nairobi. And I get in there and everyone is beautiful and it's black tie and everybody is dressed to the nines and to the heels. And I'm sitting and talking to my table mates. I'm just excited just to be in the Rainbow Room. And I made a comment. I was like, man, they're really going all out for this flight. I was like, I really don't understand why all the pomp and circumstance for this flight. And they was like, Mike, are you crazy? This is such a big deal. It takes so much effort in order to open up a new route from port to port and destinations. And there's so much that goes into it. There's so much diplomacy. There's so much policy. There's so much conversation that has to happen between two countries. And the impact of it is so grand and so wide. And audience, as you know, I love to learn with you. I'm curious with you too as well. And as the next gentleman who I'm about to introduce to the show got up and began to speak, by the time he was halfway through, I said, I've got to have this gentleman on my show. I said, he fits exactly what this show is. It's intersection of policy and lifestyle. And I have with me in studio no other than the managing director and CEO of Kenya Airways, Mr. Sebastian Mikosz. What's happening, Sebastian?
I'm good. Very happy to be here, and I'm very happy that you were here last night. Frankly, there was 250 people, so I couldn't see anyone. So I'm very happy that you were here.
You were busy greeting your crowd, man, and busy celebrating and toasting this huge accomplishment and this incredible feat that you guys have of opening up the first direct route from JFK to East Africa. That is reason to be in black tie. That is reason to celebrate. And so, cheers to you for the journey.
Yeah, that's indeed, as you said, it's a very multifacial, polyvalent project. It goes beyond just the commercial part of it. And that's what makes airlines and this type of events so interesting. We were a black tie because we wanted to make it like really New York style, as you described, the Rainbow Room, but also because we were hosting the Kenyan president, which shows the importance and the symbolic importance. You know, presidents normally don't get into commercial areas. And I believe that his presence was not to support our ticket sale, but to show the importance of the connection between the two east coasts of US and east coast of Africa. Also, it's a highly symbolic thing for Kenyans, for East Africans. I was saying yesterday during this show that, you know, it's a 1.3 billion people continent, okay, Africa, which is significant. And it's only the we will be the fifth African carrier to come to the US, and only the eighth city. Wow. So that also has a dimension of really getting people closer to each other. Of course, the purpose is to do more business, more tourism, more, all these international organizations like United Nations and para government things. But it's really a big deal for us. So it's a promise because we don't fly yet. Yeah. So we were celebrating. We were very opportunistic. The fact that the United Nations General Assembly is now on makes much easier to bring African guests. Yeah. So the president was there, but also many African involved people who were in the room with us. And we decided that 35 days ahead of the first flight, which will take place on October the 28th from Nairobi and October the 29th from New York, we will celebrate it just to make it the only and the one celebration that we do on this side of the Atlantic, because the other one will be when we fly from Nairobi.
So Sebastian, the reason why I'm smiling, I can't stop smiling, is because this is what me and my audience, we talk about all the time. And so I love peeling back the layers of things that we just take for granted as citizens, right? We just take for granted how easy it is just to go to an airport and just jump on a flight and go wherever we want to go, but not really thinking about what it took to really get there. And as we also times, I love to travel. I love going abroad. And I really never thought about the policy and the diplomacy that went into allowing me to take that flight from JFK to a country. And I think I was really blown away by that. And I think that's important for us to really begin to highlight that conversation in terms of what it's like being able to establish a route, because the route that you establish, and you said so eloquently yesterday in your remarks, has impact on trade, has impact on the economy, has impact on jobs, has impact on economic development. And we don't think about that when we board our flight, right? And we're so excited to pull out our passport. Talk to us a little bit about what it took to really get that route between Nairobi and JFK in terms of who did you have to engage? Is it as simple as you call up the State Department? I find it fascinating that the United States is one of the only ones who don't have a minister of tourism, right, to kind of connect to. And so in my mind, you called up the Secretary of State and said, hey, I will have a route. But I know it's not that easy, but like, how does one even begin that conversation?
Two things. First, yes, indeed, I think that in the U.S. market, that we all know how as a very mature, flying has become a commodity. It's like having a mobile phone or an online bank account. You just fly because connectivity is everywhere. And this word connectivity, when we decode it, it means the number of connections multiplied by the number of pairs of cities. So literally in the US, which is by far the most mature market, you can go any place multiple times. Yeah? If you take 2 points in the US, you probably will have at least 2 airlines, if not 3, 10, 15 connections daily. So you take it for granted. That's something that indeed is present only on mature markets. Europe is like this, US is like this. I think Asia is going to that direction. But in Africa, it's still not the case. And for us as airline, it's a big deal to do such a connection. So without going into a whole lecture on how you open a route, but no, it's not just calling 1 or 2 people on the US side. Unfortunately, that would be very easy, but it's not the case.
You don't WhatsApp anybody, Sebastian?
There is roughly, look, the number of permits that you have to obtain to fly a non-stop flight from a foreign country to the US, it's around 11 permits. And it goes from Department of Transportation through FAA, Border and Customs Protection, Ministry of Agriculture if you bring any livestock, any food. I mean, you need to approve 5 or 6 operating manuals. I mean, this is why airlines are so safe, by the way, because airlines are transporting now close to 4 billion people a year, with a very, very small number of fatalities, which is probably what you can have on each city as accidents per day. So worldwide, this is why we are so bureaucratic and regulated. Yes? In case of flying to the US, you have to have two basic things. I'll just narrow it down to these 2 things. First, your airport has to be category 1, so the category accepted by Department of Transportation and the FAA, and also the TSA, so the security guys. This approval takes many audits. So you have, exchange of information, formalities, lots of papers, and then people coming on the ground to audit you. And then what we obtained recently is a certificate called last point of departure, which means that you can load passengers on the last point of departure before reaching the US soil. And that took quite a while, because that's mainly delivered by TSA. There are other people involved, like Homeland Security, etc. But again, it goes through a whole system of audits, approvals, controls, checks, double checks, recommendations, etc. So, of course, this project started a long time ago. It was more than 10 years ago. It was. I think that the market was not mature enough. There were attempts; it didn't work out. Now we are 35 days ahead of the first flight, and we have all the permits in hand. So. It's a pretty big deal for an airline to open a new connection into
Right.
the US, and it doesn't happen every day.
So we talk a lot about on this show on the global economy,
Yep.
and the interconnection of global is local, local is global. And so just even hearing you talk about all the different agencies that you guys had to engage with and interact with in order to get this market opened and to get this route accomplished. You talked about it took almost 2 years. Well,
Yep.
with it also taking 10 years, that's different administration changes, right?
Yes.
And so what happens with the continuity of administration changes? Is it essentially kind of starting over and kind of restating the position and building a case of the importance of this route?
No, hopefully not. Administration changes political cycle does not affect administrative decisions. Of course, if there is a massive change of policy, like not approving any African carrier or something that would affect us. But there is the top administration level in each country. In Kenya, we had presidential elections last year, so there was also the president was re-elected, but the cabinet was changed. So it does not affect the fact of having a medium level administration working, because this is the administration that stays for years. This is what makes the continuity of the state and the application of certain, I call it, bureaucratic procedures. In this aspect, you have to rather...
Citizens, we call that over here career staffers. So there's career staffers and you have your appointees, right?
Yeah.
And so your appointees is what Sebastian is talking about when a new administration comes in. They may appoint their cabinet, they may appoint their senior directors or senior advisors.
Yep, absolutely.
But the mid-level, those are your career staffers. So those who are stays within the federal government 10 years, 25 years, 30 years for the importance of what this is right now. And as we talk about government furloughs, studying on the government, this is what you hear when you talk about appointed, essential staff only, et cetera. So to give you just a little bit more context of what Sebastian's alluded to.
And
right
essentially,
now with
this is the people that I was meeting with the team. So this is the people who knows this file since 10, 12 years. They have been a couple of times to Kenya, and despite the changes of the administration, they stay here and they say, in 2014, you were saying this is the file, we know the file is. And in 15, when we met, that was progressing, that was not progressing. So there is a absolute continuity in that, by the way, which makes this process possible, because without it, you wouldn't really be able to sustain a 4 or 5 year project. Therefore, for us, the last 3 years, that was really where the exchange was very intense, lots of visits, lots of meetings, lots of checks, audits, etc. And we are there. Yeah, we have everything we need in hand. We even took this. When you start selling tickets, you have to alert the customers that it's going to be flown subject to government approvals.
Yes.
Now we have the freedom to take
That
this
asterisk.
mention.
Yeah.
We have no asterisks anymore. So we're gonna fly.
Sebastian, dealing with asterisks in TSA, my God, you deserve that gala and that toast and that great wine that we had last night dealing with that. So I love that you broke that down, because here in the United States, we often don't even understand what the difference is between appointees and our career federal government employees. And sometimes that job gets overlooked, right? And the importance of those employees of the federal government to keep our system and our democracy running. And this is a great example of that. Citizens, if you love to fly, if you love to travel, and you're on an airplane, know that it took these career staffers to be there to maintain that continuity, which Sebastian just mentioned, in order for you to be able to fly. And so this is why I love this show that we had that really highlights lifestyle in this capacity. So Sebastian, let's go over to Kenya now for a second. Tell us why it was important for it in terms of the benefits of the country of Kenya to have this direct route. How does that impact the economy? Let's just start there, because there's so many ways that we can take it. Let's just start with the economy.
Sure. So economically, if I can make a kind of big picture, I would say there are three main reasons why we fly, or why we're gonna be flying. First, of course, it's the investments. So there is about 50 U.S. companies who elected Nairobi as the main hub or the main headquarters for Eastern Africa market. So the business already exists. I'm having my office in Nairobi just close to the airport, and just opposite to me, I see two big Coca-Cola factories. Okay, they are one of the main investors. But you have literally everyone: Google, IBM, all the consulting firms. Everyone is in Nairobi. So we know that there will be so-called corporate traffic, people who are going for business. Then there is a second big group, which is very important, and it's growing. It's the tourists, and these are people who come from generally all the U.S. market, not only East Coast, but from Texas, from California, from Illinois, and they go to Africa on those famous safaris.
Yes.
And I know it's a dream world, and this is, by the way, what we count on is that they'll come more, not only once in their lifetime, but they'll come more to have this adventure. And third,
and that's what I'm excited for. I know we have a South African here by the name of Naledi I'm going to bring to the conversation pretty soon, but they think they're known for their safaris, which I've taken and it's been amazing. But I've been waiting to take the safari in Kenya. I digress. I'm so sorry. Continue.
No. I know that there is. I know there is. How you call it? Safari competition? It
is. Yeah.
But generally speaking, I have to admit that most of the elephants looks the same in Africa. Nevertheless, there are places that are very famous in Kenya, more famous than the others. And frankly, to this point, I don't mind at all that people come to Africa, not just to Kenya, because we as an airline don't see this traffic as just like Kenya exclusive. We really would like to have a regional role. Yeah. This is why we are promoting all the time that you come to Kenya. It doesn't mean that you have to stay in Kenya. We have more than 42 destinations to Africa, regional, close, further. You can go to Zimbabwe to see Victoria Falls. You can go to Zanzibar. You can go to Tanzania, Uganda to see the gorillas, or wherever. As long as you fly this non-stop flight and you really enjoy the benefit of a direct, non-stop, shorter connection, I'm fine. Yeah. It's we cannot be jealous, because it's not about just us and keeping everyone here.
It's so interesting you raised that point, Sebastian, because that goes to the intercontinental travel within the continent, and then that goes into how having a direct flight for those of us who are in America to be able to use Nairobi as a connecting point to then use jump offs to go to other countries.
Yes.
That only helps benefit American tourists in terms of budget, but also too helps the continent as a whole, because then it begins to spread out the tourism. Because, and truth be told, in full candidacy, I actually was considering going over holidays. This is prior to meeting you. Going to Ethiopia, and then stopping at Ethiopia, and then jumping over to Kenya for that safari. But then actually Googled and looked at a price to go from Ethiopia to Kenya, which is a neighboring country, and I found the flight to be exorbitant. And then I said, well, I might as well just fly to a different country altogether outside the continent, which would make my package a lot cheaper. And so those are decision points that I had to think through. But I can only imagine now with this destination being in Nairobi, how the cost factor would come down, just for me personally into tourism, but the excitement of it too as well, and spreading intercontinental growth and economic development across the continent.
You're making it an extremely interesting and valid point with that. It would be unreasonable to think that we can bring U.S. tourists or American tourists coming also from Canada to Kenya just to keep them in Kenya and not offer them the whole continent. It's like inviting someone to come to the U.S. to visit New York and then tell him not to go to Florida. Yeah? It's for us. It's a long journey because the two continents are far away. It's almost 8,000 miles of distance. Yes. So and the time difference is like going to Europe. So I think that the time difference is quite livable because it's 7 hours, but the flight is really long. Yeah. Therefore, we will always be advertising and marketing the fact that when you come to Africa, please just make a tour. And there's of course there's many ways of doing the tour, because or you can take a tour operator. That's going to be more expensive for sure, in a very comfortable manner. You're going to welcome like a VIP, and somebody takes your bags and puts you in the car and drives you wherever you want. Or you can do the more backpacker style. When you come and locally, you kind of contact people, hotels, and you travel whenever you want, opportunistically also buying tickets. Yeah. By the way, going also to Ethiopia, which is a beautiful country and worth visiting. So for us, it's again more of more than just a country project.
Yes.
Of course, we know that we have in Kenya Masai Mara, Tsavo, and beautiful places.
Yeah.
But also there is really, if you want to go to Mauritius, if you go to Madagascar next door, or you go to Zimbabwe that I called Victoria Falls or whatever.
Yeah.
Okay, fine. That's very fine.
I actually like going to the Seychelles actually.
Seychelles is
on that.
3 hours.
Yeah,
3
actually
hours.
looked at that flight. So I can go something. I'm really excited. I'm trying to pace myself with excitement in terms of where I want to take this conversation with you. But in terms of you raised something when you talk about the first point of why it's important to have this travel. And you talked about the corporate dynamics, and you talked about some of the regional headquarters that are there,
Yes.
like the technology hubs, like the Google and the Facebook.
Yes.
And you talked about the beverage companies like Coca-Cola. That led me to think about new economic development. So His Excellency was there
Yes.
at the gala yesterday.
Yes.
As you guys thought through and planned through this new route, was economic development on the agenda, on the table, in the sense of the new corporations now that you can attract due to the ease of travel with having it as a destination and new businesses?
The answer, very short, is yes, and it always goes beyond just opening, just a connection. So, we are in a business which is very original. We means many airlines, but I can speak for Kenya Airways. When you have the name of the country in the name of the company, that always creates a broader context. And Kenya Airways means Airways for Kenya somehow, yes? So it's always something that you have to take into account, that your role or your mandate is not just to make $1 more. I mean, if the government tells you to do so, or the actually I'm saying the government because the government is a main shareholder. It's 48% of Kenya Airways. So the government has helped us in difficult times and has really being present. But we have other shareholders. We have banks, we have KLM, we are listed. So, but if the mandate that you are given is to look at the broader picture, this is what many airlines do. And this is typical for Africa, but also for Europe and for Asia, is that you see the airline as a vehicle of bringing the economic development. Because honestly, if you cannot reach a place, and I know video conferencing, WhatsApp, modern stuff, all right.
It's too much.
It's just helping people to get meeting. So you don't replace the machine by a human touch. I don't know any company so far that will invest in any country without going there and will just be satisfied with some YouTube film or some Facebook live transmission. So I think that those technology are helping people to get connected, but also to get richer and then to travel. And this is where we are entering into the game. So for me, and that's how we talked about it in the company, and we keep talking. Is really look at the broader aspect of it. Of course, it's also then not logical, because how am I calculating into my revenue the fact of increasing the GDP? At the end, I'm running a company that is for profit. It's not a foundation. It's not a subsidized operation. So it always requires some balance between what are we ready to take as risk, what are we ready to do for this development, and where to have this stream of revenue, which is necessary to finance the beautiful planes we have, and the fuel and the maintenance and the IT systems and all that costs the airline behind.
Sebastian, I need you to be the co-host of this show with me, because this is exactly how I talk, and the purpose of this show right here. For you to say GDP, I'm such a geek. So for you to say GDP...
Gross domestic product?
No, that's what I'm saying. For you to say it really got me smiling and excited, because when you think about it, when we get on the plane, we're so worried about exit or window, right? Exit row, window or aisle. We're so excited. We're going to get that upgrade, right? Into business class with the first class. And we're not really thinking about all the trickle-down effect of the impact of us actually purchasing that seat, right? And this actually really goes into soft diplomacy, which is something that we talk about on the show a lot in terms of the soft diplomacy that's offered globally, right? And the impact that having new corporations and new companies coming into Kenya, and how that can impact the local community, right? And how that can change the educational system. It can provide opportunities for individuals to get into the middle class for opportunities, right? And so all those things are from a plane ticket, essentially, right? In the broader scope of this new route that's coming up. What I want to transition to right now is actually, what is it like with trade, right? Is trade on the table for you guys? How are you guys thinking about trade? Because essentially, with Kenya being on the coast, that's a port city too as well, not just for flights, but for cargo and for ships as well. So how does this new route impact the trade dynamic?
So the new route, of course, has always a positive impact because it's easier to put cargo on the belly of a plane. We're going to be operating a Dreamliner. The Dreamliner has a very significant cargo space because it's 21 tons.
Oh, wow.
So basically, you can put quite a number of goods that you want to export or import. So of course, to go into technicalities,
Feel free to throw tariffs in there too if you like to, Sebastian. You're more than welcome to as well.
The Nairobi airport, unfortunately, is pretty high. The elevation is high. Therefore, we are limited technically in taking massive cargo. So we will not be able to uplift all the cargo. But from the New York side, we will be able to take full payload. But I would again enlarge the point of view. It's not about just transporting 21 tons multiplied by 365 days a year. I think, and that's my theory, that the trade comes first just before investment. So if you start trading a little, then you, at a certain moment, it can trigger the investment decision. Because if you sell, 5 tons of something, then 7 tons, then you have the duty, the cost of transport. At a certain point, you say, why don't I put a factory there? Yeah. Why don't I produce something locally? So and again, can you calculate it? Probably macroeconomists can do it over a period of 3 years. Yeah. With a precise spreadsheet, Excel, putting this together. But without the connection, that for sure will not happen. Will it happen? I don't know. But without it, that will not happen for sure.
Ladies and gentlemen, you are listening to the CEO and Managing Director of Kenya Airways, Mr. Sebastian Mikosz.
Yes.
He taught me that the SZ is SH here in English. On the other side of the break, I am going to talk to you about immigration and tourism and how that affects.
Sure.
And then I'm going to bring in a South African to the conversation who is a managing director of the African Travel Association. So, ladies and gentlemen, grab a snack and come on back. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. We are having a fantastic conversation with Mr. Sebastian Mikosz. As always, feel free to engage in this conversation on Twitter and online. You can reach me, as always, at I am Mike Muse, M-U-S and Sam E on Twitter and Instagram, and let us know your thoughts. Also, too, on SiriusXM's Insight Twitter handle, at SXM Insight. So, ladies and gentlemen, we're here talking about Kenya Airways, and we're celebrating their new route that's opening up from JFK all over to Nairobi. And I got to be honest, I was checking in yesterday. Sebastian, I have a little personal story, if you don't mind me entering a personal story. So this entire time, I haven't taken my ancestry DNA, right? Mm-hmm. But in my head, I'm Ethiopian, right? Yeah. Like legit, in my head, I'm Ethiopian. And I go to DC all the time, and they validate that. They automatically think I'm Habesha. And so that's completely gone to my head. And to the point where I actually called my parents. I was like, wait, who are we? Right? I was like, what is in our blood? What is in our system? So I go to check in at the table for the gala, and the young lady, she was there. She said, what's your last name? I said, Muse. She said, Muse. I said, no, it's Muse. And so she said, Muse. I was like, no, it's Muse. And so she's like, no, in Kenya, it's Muse. I was like, wait, there's muses in Kenya? And so she said, yeah, it's Muse. I was like, shut up. So now I might be Kenya, so I'm kind of confused of like, who am I? So for now, I think I'm half Kenyan and I'm half Ethiopian. And so I'm excited to share my Kenyan ancestry with you,
Great.
Sebastian.
Thank you.
So thank you on behalf of all Kenyans in America who are not Kenyan.
Yeah, but I can solve your issue who you are if you want, because
Yes.
the CS, so the Cabinet Secretary for Foreign Affairs, was quoting, it all started in Kenya anyway, because the humankind is originated from the Turkana Valley. This is where the famous Lucy was found 2 million years ago. So are you Ethiopian or Kenyan? Doesn't matter. It all started in Kenya anyway. You just walked north and then you ended in Ethiopia. So no problem. Yeah, I will save you some money on the DNA analysis. You just come to Turkana. This is where it started. No worries.
That is amazing. Well, ladies and gentlemen, he just started something, and he did that intentionally because we have Naledi Khabo, who is in the building with us right now, and the lady is South African, who I'm sure would question and combat and challenge the notion of it all started in Kenya. The lady is the executive director and managing director of African Travel Association. She's a corporate strategy leader with over over 20 years of experience in operation and marketing and technology, having developed and implemented countless of global innovative multimedia brand initiatives. She's just amazing. She's dope. She's fantastic. And she's basically in charge of getting Americans to think about Africa.
Not just Americans.
I've been corrected, Sebastian. So she's gonna correct you and correct me.
Of course.
Oh, yeah. I mean, this is what South Africans do, right? They don't.
Really?
They have no love for us Kenyans, Sebastian.
This is not true. How about we just say it all started in Africa and leave it at that, right?
Nope.
That's
Nope.
what we'll do.
If Sebastian
That's what
said it
we're gonna
started in
do.
Kenya, it started in Kenya.
I'm going since my
Kenyan
scope
pride.
is the continent. I'm gonna rock the Africa banner right here.
Well, the
Not
Maasai warrior in me would not allow you to
Well.
take that. Naledi, welcome to the Mike Muse Show.
Thank you. Thank you.
So
very
I've been
much.
corrected. So keep giving us more lessons about what ATA is and what the goal and purpose of the organization is.
Okay, so ATA was formed in 1975. It's a nonprofit tourism organization whose mission is to promote tourism to and within Africa. It's a trade organization whose members span from agents to the airlines, the actual tourism boards, hotels, basically everyone across the tourism sector. So we have 4 very important key pillars. One is obviously supporting our members through, B2B efforts, B2C efforts. Second is capacity building and skills development within the sector. So we partner with various third parties to deliver training, whatever that might be, whether it's digital marketing training, whether it's business development, also supporting public and private partnerships and investment across the sector. So bringing in the partners in terms of what are some of the obstacles to investing within the sector. And then finally, it's also this idea of brand Africa and promoting Africa's destination products. And so one of the ways that we're doing that in a different way than we have as an organization in the past is really looking at the things that make African products attractive to travelers who are interested. So that's how do you promote the continent through fashion, through music, through sports, through culture, through heritage.
So basically my show.
Basically. Basically. And so that's,
Award-winning Mike Muse
so
show.
that's why I'm here. And also I think, there's this conversation about African stories. And so for us, we act as a facilitator, as a connector. How do we as an organization amplify those stories? How do we amplify those African storytellers? How do we connect them with whether it's media outlets here, whether it's the likes of you, and whether that story is about medicine, science, music, that all impacts how people think about Africa, which ultimately informs their travel decisions and their attitudes towards traveling to the continent.
That's what I love about being in conversation with both you and Sebastian, because a lot of times we, as just travelers, right? Like, again, as I keep mentioning, ladies and gentlemen, we just book our ticket online and we just go, not really thinking about all the things that you just mentioned, the B2B, right? That's not even in my mind as I'm thinking about purchasing my ticket, right? It's not on my mind about the economic development and the soft diplomacy as I'm booking my ticket, and the whole notion of brand Africa isn't on my mind as I'm going on the safari in South Africa to really just to get that shot with the lion, right? And so it's really impressive to learn so much about it. And so tell me a little about the importance that you believe of having this new direct route from JFK to Nairobi, how that impacts the business positions of ATA.
Well, I think you touched on it, even from a leisure or consumer perspective. The more routes you have, the more gateways you have to Africa, is going to increase travel. Where cost and time is a barrier, it's going to inform your travel decisions. Even as an organization, when we're determining where to have our conference, that's a major factor. Where can people get in straight? We're going to be less likely to pick a destination that doesn't have some type of a straight connection from somewhere in the United States, because at least 30% of our constituency is from North America. Mm-hmm. So, that informs those business decisions just as it does other organizations who are looking to build businesses across the continent. So where are these gateways? What makes the most sense? Knowing that now there's another direct flight to the continent, that makes it easier to travel to the continent and within the continent. It gives you more options. That cost is a serious barrier, because if not for business, I may not travel to the continent as much. Within the continent, I've had to, from Morocco to South Africa, I had to go back to Europe to go back down to South Africa.
Wow.
Like that's a problem.
I
had to do that for business.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm just slow down a little bit and just to give, so people can get that picture geographically what that looks like. So say it again, say it a little bit slower though.
Sorry. Yes. So for example, when I was in Morocco for business and had to go to South Africa, I had to go back to Spain to go back down to South Africa.
So you went north just to go south.
Yes.
Which makes no sense.
Which makes no sense. And a lot of countries that aren't connected, people either have to go back to Europe or go through the Middle East. And so when you're looking even at Africans on the continent who want to travel within the continent, it's just easier and more cost effective to come to the United States, to go to Europe. And I think even in terms of some of the things Sebastian talked about before, when people now go to Europe, they don't think about, I'm just going to the UK. They think automatically, I can go to Europe, I can hit Spain, I can hit, I can do all of these things. And so I think we're trying to move in that direction too. When you think about tourism to Africa, how do we increase regional tourism? How do we increase intra-Africa travel, not just amongst Africans, but amongst like the Americans and the Europeans who are going? So that trip to Nairobi and Joburg is realistic and doesn't seem daunting.
Yeah.
And so I think the more people you get there, whether it's through leisure or through business, is going to have a significant impact on the economy.
So I've been talking to Sebastian about business development. I've been talking to him about soft diplomacy. In your role as ATA, and I know Sebastian and Kenya Airways have been working on this project for over 10 years, does your association get involved, and it may not be with Kenya Airways, but do you get involved with other corporations within the continent to help promote this type of business, to promote this type of business development? And if so, do you connect with the policymakers, and do you guys help bring these people to the table?
Well, yes. I mean, I think just even in terms of the Kenya Airways launch, obviously that's something that we want to amplify and promote. And when you think about other businesses, we do have relationships with the ministries across the continent. So some of the things that we do is we try to bring in the policymakers as well as the business stakeholders and have those conversations, because a lot of times we want to identify what are the barriers to doing business in the continent and how can they be addressed. And so sometimes even that involves pulling in the State Department, because then the State Department or Commerce wants to help facilitate American businesses doing business in Africa. So we sort of serve that role as facilitator. We don't get involved in policy. It's more about how can we bring the people to the table to have those conversations. How do we bring people to the table who may be interested in investing? Because a lot of times it's also a question of transparency. Every country has different regulations, different requirements to doing business with, foreign entities. So if it's only for us to say these are the opportunities in Zimbabwe and this is what it's going to require, these are the opportunities in Ethiopia and these are the requirements and these are the people that you need to talk to if you're trying to do business.
So I wasn't going to go here, but now that I have Sebastian here and you here, our listenership is wide and varies. I did a conversation, listeners, you may recall, when Black Panther came out. And I had a gentleman on who does infrastructure investment. He's a private equity guy who particularly looks at infrastructure investments within the continent. As a result of that conversation, individuals across the world actually hit him up to engage in conversations with him to figure out how they can get more infrastructure projects going on within the continent. So for a listener out there who may have a business, and business is relatively, it could be upscale, it could be small, it could be large. Now that we have Kenya Airways has opened up, would they connect with your association to get advice on how to get business conducted within the continent?
We can steer them in the right. We can be a resource to steer them in the right direction. So we don't necessarily give business advice, but we can connect them to the business or the government entities who can tell them this is what you need to do.
Oh, listeners, that's key.
Yeah.
So, Naledi, make sure you give your contact information out later on. I don't think we're going to give Sebastian's out because they're going to hit him up for free tickets. So we got to be careful with that. Well, unless he wants to give out free tickets, you're more than welcome to, Sebastian.
If you buy 3, I can give you 1 for free.
Oh, I see what you did there. So buy 3, get 1?
We can pack. It's like wash and go, and
or we get 3 free and then we'll buy 1.
That's
we have to incentivize.
That's
We don't
funny
know.
math.
Nobody's ever
That's
taken this
funny
route
math,
before,
Mike.
Sebastian. We haven't taken
if you
this
buy
route.
1 business class top fare, I can give you 3 economy. No problem. Let's go offline and we'll make a deal. I came to sell 85,000 tickets, so I can
Make a plan.
I see
Make a
how well you are in
plan.
negotiation. That's how we got the route going right there. All right, so I want to bring you guys both into conversation now at this point. I left off before the break about immigration. And so, Sebastian, I want to talk to you about tourism and immigration. And for our listeners out there, they may not know how much that goes hand in hand. In terms of tourism and immigration. And then later, I'm going to talk to you from a different aspect of the immigration conversation that's happening here in America right now. So, Sebastian, when it comes to immigration and you guys were getting these routes going, was that part of the conversation? And if so, how and in what capacity, if you're able to share?
Of course, I am. No, the answer is very simple. Immigration is not part of why we establish a connection. First of all, there are rules of immigration in the U.S. which are pretty clear. But also remember that Africa is 52 countries, completely different countries, each one having their own immigration rules. So we are just trying to make sure, and that's our job, that people boarding the planes have the right papers. But that's where our role ends. Yeah, on both sides of the line, on both sides of the road. We have to be sure that you have the proper visa, proper passport, and it's not forged documents, which is, frankly, that's an international standard for any airline, whatever connection you made. How does it influence immigration? How does it influence the politics? That's not our job and not our mandate. There is a quite extensive Kenyan diaspora in the U.S. There is
I'm now one of them.
Yeah, you are one of them.
Thank
We
you
just
very much.
identified it,
Yeah.
but half Ethiopian, half Kenyan. So I think that this diaspora knows the rules, and they are the natural customers of this connection. There is quite a number, actually, of U.S. citizens living in Kenya. Remember that other than New York, Nairobi and Geneva are the three cities for the United Nations when they have the biggest hubs. I mean, I pass by United Nations every day. It's 5,000 people working in Nairobi for UN. So I think that's really in the hands of the government. That's not in the hands of the airline. So we are more focused on tourism. We know that, and we observed that there is quite a growing interest also from East Africans. There is also people making money in Africa. I know that Africa has this image of the poorest statistic continent, which is probably true. But then you have middle class, which is growing. That's the whole point, by the way, of having a connection. Airlines get richer if the middle class gets richer, because this is where people start traveling. And there's people coming to New York just to visit. Yeah? And so that's what we are focusing on.
So that's why I said you can be my co-host, because that's where I was heading with Naledi in terms of images of the continent. And I'm just curious, Naledi, with all that's been happening, I mean, prior to some of the most recent statements about the continent having shithole countries, if you will, there's always been this National Geographic image of Africa, which is not the middle class that Sebastian just mentioned.
Right.
They always show scenes where there is this technological space. They don't promote the idea that tech hubs are there, like Google and the Facebooks are there. And so in your work that you're doing in this position that you have, how are you guys overcoming that challenge of branding Africa to the world to get beyond those very basic, limited images that comes through media?
Well, I think that's one of our most significant challenges. And people tend to use the phrase changing the narrative, which I actually don't really like, because I think that it's a little bit reactive instead of being proactive. And it relies on the notion that we're going to have to change the Western sentiment, because that's what we're talking about when we're talking about changing the narrative. And I think we need to be more proactive. There's plenty of positive African voices, whether they're on the continent or across the world. They're not just being amplified. So for us, it's about how do we amplify those voices and those stories, because they're there, just no one's hearing them necessarily in a way that people are hearing the traditional voices. And so it's more so about changing perceptions and perspectives than changing the narrative, because we're not going to change the Western narrative. It is what it is. The Western media is what it is. How do we then create and control our own narrative? And what does that look like? How do we identify those key voices and those key stories across the continent and beyond who are positive in terms of Africa and what Africa has to offer? Because as you said, there's so much going on, but you don't hear about it, but it's happening. So how do we make sure people start hearing about it? And what role do the governments and the tourism boards play in making sure that that amplification takes place? And so we try to sit there, whether it's in an advisory position, whether it's in a proactive position, in making sure that we are getting even key media, to tell these stories. How are we, these amazing content creators coming out of the continent, do you know who they are? How do we get to know? How do I get them on your show? Yeah. What is that? What role is a tourism board also elevating or amplifying those voices? And so what role do they play in that and having that responsibility? Because if we don't do it, we can't rely on the West changing the narrative.
So I'm going to ask you one question. Oh, Sebastian, you want to add on to that?
I really like this type of statement, because I've moved to Africa 17 months ago, so I'm a fresh African citizen. Okay.
Oh, nice. Welcome.
Yeah, thanks.
On behalf of my people, welcome to my country.
and I think that the key problem, which is what I see, is not just even not calling. There is not Africa. There are Africas. You are talking about a continent which is. If you take a map, you can find it quickly on Google. If you put US, China, India, Europe next to it, you still didn't feel in Africa. It's the continent which is geographically extremely big and extremely diversified. So there is no one Africa, because if you take Ethiopia that we mentioned, Ethiopia was never colonized. It's a 10th century of stories, origins of Christianity. One of the first Bible written in Ethiopian. And then 5 hours flight, there is Zimbabwe, who got her independence in 1980. In 1980, like really 28 years ago. So and those two countries are still called Africa. Then you take Egypt, which is not sub-Saharan Africa, and then you take Mauritania, which is next to Western Africa, which is a set of small countries, which has nothing to do with Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania. So I think that what we have to learn also, or maybe start learning, there is no Africa, there are Africas, different ones, with variety of ethnicity, variety of religions, variety of economic situations, variety of political situations. Look, Rwanda and Burundi, as the two countries with two different tribes living next to each other, almost same size. Rwanda, who has done tremendously well over the last years, stabilizing the country, getting the growth, and Burundi, who is always on the verge of a political problem. And these countries are next to each other, and when you see on the map, sometimes it's really difficult to, they are almost like one. Yeah? So this is the perception that is unfortunately not going through the media.
And I think another challenge is because there are so many countries, but the reality is people do couple it. So I think that's the challenge, right? How do you address those negative perceptions? Because when something bad happens to one country, it has an impact across the entire continent. So on the flip side, can you use that to your advantage? So if something amazing is happening in South Africa, can the other countries benefit from that also? So I think that's always the challenge, how do you balance that?
That was the problem of Ebola, I remember when we had Ebola crisis. There is Ebola in Africa. What do you mean? Ebola was 4,500 miles from Kenya, and the people were canceling traveling when it was closer to London than to Nairobi. So,
but it impacted.
But it has this one big map, this big spot, which is Africa, but it's not Africa. They're Africas. So that's one of the, I think, key challenges also for us as airline.
What I love about this conversation right now is that, Sebastian, I've actually in my audience knows I'm very candid. If I'd never heard of something, or I'm not aware of anything, I never heard the term Africus. And so I
just created it. So.
Oh, okay.
Trademark.
No, but I'm saying, even if you just created it, it was such a good use to give an illustration of all the different types of countries and cultures and religions that occur in Africa, because, I work with just doing my part and having responsibility with this microphone or in front of the camera to make sure I'm very cognizant of making sure I say the continent, right? Because for so many times, just those outside the continent group Africa as this one big ass country, right? And so just getting people to change up that Africa isn't a country, it's a continent, and it's amazing how...
And there's so much more than just safari, by the way.
Than just safari.
Oh, yeah. That's another image, safari.
I think you guys just shaded me. I think that was a shots fired to me, right?
Just wanted to make sure that was there for the record.
So I'm really glad you both highlighted that, right? And your use of the word continent, and then your use of the term Africas to really educate our listeners of the wide variety of the ecosystem, which is the continent. And Naledi, I'm going to ask you one question two different ways. And so feel free to answer the more PC way. I'm going to say it. And Sebastian, feel free to stay out of it.
Okay.
If you like.
I will try.
As we talk about, this very bad image of Africa that a lot of Americans, I know you represent the globe, but just from the American point of view, there always this negative image of Africa and things that people have to say. Do individuals who live on the continent and as part of the Africas care at this point what America thinks? Are we the end-all, be-all? A lot of times Americans get on their high horse and think that we are the end-all, be-all to the world. So does our perception matter? I guess it's more the PC way. Does our perception matter to the continent?
Well, to your point, I can't speak for everyone on the continent or for every country on the continent. So that's the disclaimer. But I think it's a yes and a no. I think that perception matters because perception is going to drive travel, right? And travel decisions. So it makes a difference because if you have a negative perception, you're not going to travel to whatever destination on the continent. And we need people to come to the continent and to travel within the continent. So it matters. That said, I do think that there has been a swell of, I don't know that it's so much we don't care what the U.S. thinks, but more so about African pride. And that's country to country. So I think more and more Africans are taking pride in where they're from and in also visiting other areas of the country. So I think that's more so the case.
Yeah. Well, listen, guys, I can talk to you both all day, every day for longer. Sebastian, you're officially my new co-host of the Mike Muse Show. Anytime.
I'll be since 28th of October. I can do every week. So you just tell me I jump 14 hours, show, back.
Yeah, you always have a seat here, my friend, and a microphone whenever you just happen to be in New York City coming through JFK. And the lady, you're always welcome to come back to as well to talk about Brand Africa and the ways that we can help change the perception.
Thank you.
You taught me not the narrative, but the perception on the continent and Africa's. And so with that being said, Sebastian, cheers to you and Kenya Airways, and cheers to His Excellency for such a fantastic opportunity that's about to happen to the country. For individuals who may be interested in eventually going to Kenya, hopefully within this year or next year, how can they purchase tickets? What's the website address? Do you guys have a Twitter account, Instagram?
We have all of this. There is our account, KenyaAirways.com. We have plenty of travel agents, tour operators in the U.S. I think that if somebody wants to travel, they will find us really, really easily.
Okay, awesome. And Naledi, how can people reach out to you and or ATA for more information and how to connect and be a resource?
Info at africatravelassociation.org. We're on Twitter at Africa Travel ATA. We're on Instagram at Africa Travel Association, on Facebook as Africa Travel Association. But if you just hit us, info or ATA at africatravelassociation.org, someone will get back in touch.
Awesome. And ladies and gentlemen, as always, I am Mike Muse, MUS as in Sam E on Instagram and on Twitter. And also you can reach us here at Sirius XM Insight at SXM Insight. Until next week, folks. Awesome. Peace.
My number one in tutu, sipping bruku tutu. For your love it tutu, I go chuku chuku chuku.
Hey boo-boos, it's Phoebe Robinson.
And I'm Jessica Williams.
And we're the hosts of Two Dope Queens.
Brought to you by WNYC Studios.
We get real. Well, we can't say how real we get. For all we know, you might have a kid in the room or be on a car ride with your mom.
Yeah, we don't want to make it weird and upset anyone. But you really should listen to our podcast. We've got New York's best stand-up and storytellers, too. Listen on Wednesdays at 9 p.m. Eastern on Sirius XM Insight 121.
Sit down with Alfred and Chris.
A discussion of music,
movies, television.
It's like your local newspaper's art section.
Is Twin Peaks more influential than the Larry Sanders Show?
Who's the best Anderson?
Paul Thomas or Wes?
It's a lifestyle show. We discuss fandom with celebrities,
writers, critics, and comedians.
Where's the oldest bar in New York?
But Spielberg's best movie. It's Sit Down with Alfred
and Chris.
Now on Thursdays at 6 p.m. East
on Sirius XM Insight 121.
And on demand
anytime on your SiriusXM app.